Welcome to the 8th installment. The episode's first story is yet another that comes from Reddit. So let's just jump in. Neither of us have entirely recovered from the incident, yet I expect that we will in time. But it is still a little too recent. It happened a few months ago when my boyfriend Mark and I decided to take a guided tour of a cavern whilst on holiday in Derbyshire. For your own safety, and that of anyone who reads this, I won't give the exact location. It was a beautiful July day, sunny and warm, and we took a cable car up to the visitor center in the late morning. We had eaten lunch and 2 ice creams each by the time our slot for the tour came up. I suppose we were both a little overexcited. The cave was huge and it was beautiful. A few of the tunnels were man-made. It had been a fluorospar mine during the Victorian era, but most of the openings that we could see from the main passage had been carved into the rock by flowing water over thousands of years. As we followed the tour, we deliberately hid in the back like naughty teenagers, so we could explore the caverns on our own and take silly pictures. It was far too dark for any of them to turn out well, but we were having fun and feeling a little giddy. The tour guide had to return to where we were a few times to hurry us along. We lingered in a large chamber as the guide was distracted by a family with 2 young children who had decided that he was going to earn his wage that day by answering every question they had. They were at a macabre age, it seemed, and were particularly interested in how many people had died down there and whether the caves might be haunted. Their parents stood by smiling indulgently at their morbid little angels. "Well," said the guide, "there have been mining accidents down here. Conditions were quite dangerous back then. As to whether the place is haunted, I'll have to leave that for you to decide." He leaned down towards the children, conspiratorially. "But some of the other guides have said that when they're down here alone, they can hear scraping in the walls." The children giggled wide-eyed. Behind them, their mother dramatically clutched her hands to her chest and exclaimed, "Oh, how spooky." Beside me, I heard Mark give a snort of laughter. He and I were lurking near the back of the group again so that we could examine some of the pretty crystals that covered the walls in patches. The cavern had a few dim lights dotted throughout so that we could all see where we were going, but they were nowhere near illuminating enough to drive away the darkness. They were, however, different colors, giving the crystals a pleasant rainbow hue. We wanted more time to take pictures than we had been given, so we hid ourselves in the shadows whilst the group moved on to the next section. "Oh no," I said to Mark as we stepped laughing back out onto the path. "Somehow we've been left behind again." I spent a few minutes taking photos, first of Mark doing comical poses, and then of the crystals. Everything was coming out blurry though, so I eventually gave up. "Come on, we better go," I said, tucking my phone back into my pocket. But Mark didn't follow me. He had wandered into a recess in the wall off to the side of the path. A small area had been cordoned off with a chest-high plastic barrier. I joined him beside it and looked down. There was a hole. A tunnel dropped straight down for 8 meters or so and then sharply curved off to the side. The light in the cavern was just bright enough for us to see down it. It was maybe 1 meter or so in diameter, easily big enough for a person to fit down. "Oh," said Mark, grinning at me. "Spooky." I tugged his sleeve, leave the spooky stuff alone, and let's go. Or the guide will tell us off again. If you were a proper adventurer, declared Mark, laughter in his voice, you'd want to explore down there. Fuck off, I exclaimed. I'll leave that nonsense to the potholers and cave divers. Don't you remember what happened to that John Jones guy and how he died? I knew he did. That story had messed me up for a while. Mark gave the plastic wall a little tug. There was clearly no real intent, he was just winding me up, but to both of our surprise, it lifted up completely and came away. Oh, said Mark, standing there and holding it. I didn't expect that. He placed it down against the wall, then gave me a huge smile. It's like the universe wants us to go down there. I glanced down at the hole, feeling an unpleasant rush of vertigo at the drop, and a little chill of fear at the darkness down there. Come on, I pleaded, stepping away. Don't mess around. He saw that I was genuinely a little distressed and softened. I'm sorry, love. I was just messing around. Of course, I remember John Jones. He turned to pick up the screen. I'll just put this back and then we can... But he didn't finish the sentence. As he reached to pick up the curve of plastic, his foot slipped on the wet rock and, with an awkward twist, he stumbled into the hole. I cried out in fear and lunged forward to grab him, my hands clamping around one of his arms as he fell. I was nowhere near strong enough to catch him, but it seemed to slow him enough that he could grab onto the edge and prevent himself from disappearing completely into the darkness below. I released his arm and instead twisted my fingers into the back of his shirt, hoping to help him as he tried to pull himself up. But I couldn't get enough of a grip. If I could just reach a little further down and grab his belt, that might do it. But kneeling down at the side of the hole as I felt a little precarious, and I was afraid that I would tip in too. Before I could start calling out for help, something deeper into the hole caught my eye. Beyond Mark, right where the tunnel curved away into darkness, was a tiny glint of light. I stared at it in confusion. What was I seeing? My brain tried to tell me that it was just one of the lights reflecting off of a crystal, but I rebelled against that, knowing that it was something else. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could finally make out what I was looking at. It was an eye. Down in the hole where the tunnel disappeared from sight, a face was peering up at me. Only half of it was visible. The rest hidden behind rock, but I could make out its two small pupils, a hole of a nose and a gaping smile, wider than seemed possible, splitting the face open. I could make out its large flat teeth and the shine of saliva dripping down its chin. A violent shudder ran through me, and the only sound I could hear was my heart pounding in my ears. For a moment, I was completely paralyzed by fear. And then the face began to move out into the tunnel. With a cry of horror and my previous concerns immediately forgotten, I lunged forward to grab Mark's belt. I yanked on it, my muscles burning with the exertion, my eyes locked onto the thing in the hole. Climb up, I screamed at Mark. Up, up, get up. Jesus Christ, you have to get out. Mark had no idea what was happening, but was clearly affected by my sudden terror. He began to scrabble desperately against the wall, his feet pushing against the wet rock, wrenching himself up to try and gain a purchase with his hands. I was trying to lift him, pulling as hard as I could, but God, I was so weak and he was so heavy. My screams had become wails as we made no ground, and that thing was getting closer. Still, just a face in the dark, but climbing, its split grin growing wider, coming closer and closer to my boy. And then suddenly Mark was rising up. I barely registered that there were other people there, other hands lifting him out. We were both dumped unceremoniously on the floor, where we lay beyond exhausted. I was almost oblivious to their concerned questions or the tour guide standing over me angrily asking why we'd moved the screen and what we thought we'd been playing at. I just hung onto Mark and cried, my eyes still locked onto the hole in the rock and what might come out of it. But there was just darkness. Unsurprisingly, the tour was cut short. We were taken back to the entrance, given stern words and told not to come back. When the cable car ride tripped back to the car park, Mark just held my hand in silence, and it wasn't until we were out on the other side that he finally asked me what I had seen down there. I told him, even though I knew it sounded ridiculous. I didn't expect him to believe me. Out here in the bright sunshine, I was starting to doubt it myself. He paused for a moment. It did seem, he said carefully, that just before they pulled me out, I felt fingers on my ankle. I exhaled softly. Then I reached over and gripped his hand. We won't be visiting any more caves. Reddit user Dr. Price Compendium asked me to credit the story to J. King. For their support and allowing me to narrate their story, I have provided a link to Dr. Price Compendium's site in the description below. So please support Dr. Price Compendium like they did me by allowing me to share their story with you. Caves can be a very scary place. Only one can imagine what truly lies in the darkest of depths. In the story previously told, a name was mentioned, and that name was John Jones. His name has become a staple in the discussion of spelunking tragedies. November 24th, 2009. John Jones was visiting family in Utah for the Thanksgiving holiday when he and a large group decided to visit Nutty Putty Cave, located west of Utah Lake in Utah County. The large group, consisting of friends and family, entered the cave around 8 p.m. At some point, John Jones and a few others split off from the group to find a more challenging opening called the Birth Canal. John Edward Jones, much like his father and brother, had a history of cave diving for sport. This was John's first time exploring Nutty Putty Cave, as it had only been open to the public for a few months since being closed previously for a near-fatal spelunking incident prior to John's. John also had taken some time off from the family sport as he was living in Virginia while attending medical school. It was about an hour into their exploration when John mistook an opening he had come across as the birth canal. Unfortunately for John, this mistake would have fatal consequences. John ventured headfirst into the narrow passage only to realize he had made a terrible mistake. Unable to wiggle back the way he came, John's only option was to push forward and hope he could free himself from the tight spot he now found himself in. But in order to do so, John had to take a deep breath in to fit through the 10 by 10 inch fissure that dropped down to another opening in the cave. Believing the fissure was wider than it was, John sunk in his chest and slipped down. But once his chest expanded, he became stuck. And with every attempt to free himself, John slid further down into the crevice. John's brother Josh did try to free him, but found those attempts were not only making things worse, but wasting valuable time. John's 10 by 10 inch opening had now narrowed to 8 inches, and John was now hanging upside down. In the human body, blood vessels are customized to make sure blood doesn't pool up in our feet. However, our bodies did not evolve to keep blood from pooling in our brain. Not only that, but our lungs are extremely delicate. They are not meant to have the weight of other organs pressed up against them for long periods of time. Time was of the essence, and emergency services were called. The whole ordeal lasted over a day, and the rescue team had finally given up on the 28th hour when John sadly passed away. He passed away hanging in the same position his brother initially found him in 28 hours earlier. Claustrophobia aside, that is one terrible way to go. John died at the young age of 26, leaving behind a wife, a 1-year-old daughter, and one on the way. For those of you eager to get out of these closed quarters, you'll be happy to know that this next story takes place in a home and was submitted by a dear friend of mine by the name of Elena. So without further ado, let's begin. It was April, back in 2015, on a very dark night. Elena and her bestie, Sarah, decided to have a girls' night together. This night consisted of a movie, a few drinks, and, of course, a Ouija board. This wasn't uncommon for the two. Being fans of the odd and macabre, nights like this were quite common. Now I know what you're thinking. You are probably expecting me to say that the two girls decided to play the game and the planchette would move and begin answering all kinds of questions that only a certain spirit would know, right? Well, for the first time you'd be wrong. Because the girls didn't even play the game before things started to happen. In fact, the game was really just brought out as decor, a prop to enhance their experience while watching horror movies. Elena turned off all the lights and they began watching The Strangers. If you are unaware of this movie's plot, then perhaps a quick synopsis. Two people, while presumed safe in their home, are soon proven wrong when a group of strangers enters their home, tortures them, and then leaves them for dead. It was at one point during the movie that one of their drinking cups that had been set on top the Ouija board began to move. I know what you're thinking. Condensation, right? Well, Elena actually thought that too, which is why she picked up the cup, wiped it off, and sat it back down, only for it to happen again. Thinking there must be a logical explanation for this, Elena decided to wipe the cup down again, just for it to happen again. The girls shrugged this off and continued watching the movie. It was then, during a very dark, quiet part, that a loud knock at the door interrupted the movie. Startled, the girls jump up and look to see who had knocked, only to find no one there. A nervous giggle and a snarky comment, the girls unpause the movie and continue watching. This is when the light behind the couch turned on. This light was one of those tall standing lamps the kind with a rather stiff, twistable knob, not the kind connected to a light switch. So, movie paused. Elena gets up. Again, this time turning off the lamp. Another unexplained occurrence, and the movie begins again. Only the next interruption would be more difficult to ignore. For this time, all the lights in the house flipped on. The girls, being very scared at this point, decide to leave all the lights on. But they did continue watching the movie. But this would also be their last attempt, since the next thing to happen would be all the lights, including the TV, turning off at the same time. Needless to say, the girls did not attempt to watch the movie. After that, nothing more happened that evening, although enough already had. The Ouija board that the girls had pulled out that night was an old wooden one. God only knows who had it before them and what it was used for. Perhaps out of superstition, Elena nor her friend ever finished that movie. With activity escalating every minute viewed, they figured perhaps that ending did not need to be known. I hope you've enjoyed the stories provided to you. Be sure to support Dr. Price Compendium by visiting the link in the description and on screen now. Also, I'd like to thank Elena for contributing to the stories you've heard tonight. Elena is an amazing artist, and perhaps you will see some of her work in things to come. But until then, like, subscribe, and click that little notification bell to be notified when I drop new videos, because I have so much in store for you. And don't forget, stay afraid.